Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today we're gonna make a gaffy stick. If you know me at all, you know that I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I've made the Darksaber, I've made the Mando rifle, I'm making an R2-D2 and this console, and now I want to make a gaffy stick. If you've been watching the new season of The Mandalorian, I'm going to do my best not to spoil anything, but one of these gaffy sticks causes some terrible damage to some stormtroopers. And I want to make one of these, but rather than making a prop, I want to make a real one. If you're not familiar, the gaffy stick is a weapon used by the Tusken Raiders from the original Star Wars movie, and basically it's just a big melee weapon. It's a stick with a hook on the end and some sort of a big fat thing that they can bash stuff with. Really, they use it as a tool and a weapon, and there's no particular way to make this. Everyone was handmade, and it's made with whatever junk they can find laying around the planet, so that gives us a lot of freedom. The first step I want to do here is to take a piece of metal out to the forge at the farm and bend it into the hook and start to add the spike. I don't know much about forging, so I'm just going to kind of wing this, but the idea is to take this thick bar, draw out a little bit of it, and then bend it over the horn of the anvil, and then we're going to take the tip of it and grind that down into a spike. Now there's another big clunky thing that needs to go on here, and I'm not exactly sure how to make that, but I've got some scrap. That was surprisingly easy to get bent down into this shape. It's still really hot, but eventually I want to go ahead and take the end of this down into a point. And I think I'll probably end up doing that with the grinder rather than trying to forge it, just because I don't have the skills yet. The other section on this end is actually a thinner material that looks like it has some sort of a coupling there. I'm just going to weld them together. But it goes down and then it has these metal kind of fins sticking out on all sides and then a point past that. So I'm going to take the thinner stuff back to the other shop and then cut it down to size and start to weld on those fins. I've got these fins cut and they need to be welded on here, one on each of the four sides. But before I do that, I want to add this spike to the end. Now there's a bunch of different spikes that I've seen for these, but one I want to attempt is a kind of four-sided pyramid. So it starts right here and trails down to a single point here, but the four sides are all flat. Now I could do this with a grinder and it would just take a really long time, so instead I'm going to try on my Bridgeport to put it in here and flatten out a surface and then flip it, flatten, and just keep doing that until I get those four sides. Even though I didn't really know what I was doing, this thing turned out to be awesome. I'm really happy with the progress here. So next up, we're going to take these fins and weld them on. I just need to make sure that they are parallel and perpendicular to each other. So I'm going to use this mag switch and actually hold it up against them and then turn on these magnets, and this is going to hold this piece in place the same distance off the table. I've set up a little jig here. I can set these pieces in place, and that puts them right in the center line of this rod so that I can tack them in place and then flip it over and do the same. The spike end of this thing is pretty much done. Now I didn't have to actually fully weld these things on. A tack would have worked just fine on each one of these fins, but after looking at the reference material, there's some really nasty welds because I guess people in Star Wars are not good welders. So I went back and added some extra welds and then ground them down just to kind of intentionally make it messy. So this part is done. Now we need to move back to the other end where the big mace is. I needed a huge chunk of metal to be able to make a piece to put on the other end, and I had to order it because I couldn't find it locally. Oh, so now I've got this gigantic piece of steel, and I need to cut this down into a little block so that we can shape that block into kind of a ball disc something to stick on the big spike on the other end. Got this down to a smaller chunk, and before we take it out and put it in the forge, because I'm not a blacksmith, I want to knock off the corners of this. Eventually I'm going to want this to be kind of a disc, kind of a ball, something like that shape. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the corners so that once we heat it up I have a little bit less work to do to get it into the shape that I want. Unfortunately, I think we're gonna have to switch gears. So I started trying to hit this when it was hot, and honestly, it's too big of a piece. I don't have tongs that are big enough to really hold it comfortably so that I can work on it, and I'm not sure that I have the skill or the power to actually change the shape of this yet because it's such a big piece. So I think we're actually gonna cut down a smaller piece and try to work more with the grinder and the cutoff wheels to get the shape that we want. Unfortunately, I think we're gonna leave this one to cool and head back to the other shop. We're back at the shop, and I was going through all the different materials that I could possibly use to make this piece, and it dawned on me that I actually have a piece of Delrin plastic that's going to work great for this. Delrin is very dense, and it's used for a lot of different things. In this case, it should hold up just fine, and we can turn it on the wood lathe. So I've got this large piece, way bigger than I need. I'm going to put it on the lathe, round it out into kind of a ball shape, and then start adding all the texture that this thing needs. Then we'll go back and drill a hole in it so it can fit on the spike, which we still have to do. This stuff takes no time at all to turn. It cuts really easily. It's very uniform in the material, but it's a super big mess. In fact, it wraps itself around the piece that you're trying to cut and you can't see your tool, so you have to stop every once in a while and clean it off. Basically, I've got kind of a rounded shape that I'm going to start with. Now I'm going to go back with individual tools and kind of cut in some grooves all the way around it. And once I get some rings in it, then we'll have to take it off and figure out a way to put in the rings on the opposite direction so we've got a perpendicular grid on the outside of this thing. Now that we've got that one set of stripes in, we need to add the perpendicular stripes to make kind of a grid, but I also want it to be kind of organic. It doesn't need to look machined. So we're going to use an angle grinder with a grinding wheel. So this has some thickness to it, has a little bit of a bevel. We're going to go and like make some lines across this thing and then spin it, make some more lines. And we'll probably have to flip it over to add the opposite lines so that we have bevels going in both directions, but let's jump in here and give it a shot and see what it looks like. This stuff creates a lot of really fine plastic dust. It's nasty, so we're definitely going to wear these. To get this to go onto the spike, I need a 1-inch hole. That's what the size of the bar is. But I also have to figure out how to get this to stay on the spike. So I'm going to drill a 7/8 inch hole in this and then heat up that metal and kind of try to hammer it in place. So hopefully it will melt the plastic just a little bit so that we can get it in there, and then it will be a really tight fit. We'll see. Worst case, I guess we could add some epoxy or something, but I'm going to try to avoid that if possible because I don't think much is going to stick to Delrin. That was the absolute maximum depth of cut that I could make with a hole that big. But now this is ready to go on a spike, but we still need the spike. So I'm going to take this piece and kind of shave this down, I think, just with the grinder, just because that's where we are. Can't go back out to the forge very easily. And then once we get this down to a spike, we're going to heat this whole section up and put this on here and then hammer it on till it's about, I don't know, back here. So we need to mark exactly where to put the spike and how far to taper it, and then we'll start with the grinder. We've got these two pieces done. This stuff stinks, by the way, when you heat it up. Be sure to wear a respirator. I put one on and it helped a whole lot. These two pieces are ready to now be welded together. And in the pictures I've seen, there's some sort of a little coupler. I think this is supposed to be telescoping. We're not going to do that, but we are going to kind of fake the coupler. I've got these big bearings that I used for another project, and so I'm going to slide this over the small section, weld the two sections together, and then just tack this in place. It won't be structural at all, but it will kind of act as a coupler visually. Now this thing is complete. The only thing left is to take it out and test it by smashing some stuff. It's a terrible shame that we had to destroy these original screen-used Stormtrooper helmets, but this thing was a lot of fun to make. Obviously, this is not something that needs to exist in the real world, but it was a lot of fun to make something that wasn't a prop, something you could actually use. If this gave you an idea for a project, I would love to hear about it down in the comments. But we've also got tons of other types of projects that you may be interested in. If you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. And then we can take it out and try it out and smash some stuff. I'm gonna try all that again, because that was a bunch of nonsense. It's nonsense. Ow, that thing is hot. Be sure to check those out. Be sure to go down and do that below. What do I usually say? If you're not subscribed, be sure to do that. It's good.